There's an important issue being discussed right now about the role that police play in our society and how that role intermingles with the use of force, and especially fatal force. So the Washington Post has been collecting data about this since 2015, cataloging every fatal shooting by on-duty police officers in the United States, doing that with news clippings and police reports and social media reports. They have this database available now, so you can go and look at this data and learn more yourself about how is force being used, and maybe use that to shape our ideas of how we can reimagine the use of force and potentially minimize it in the future. What I want to show today is just a couple things that I saw in the data, just to give you a sense of what's there and give you some ideas for maybe what you can do with it. So I pulled that data into Knarr as of June 2nd, and they keep updating this as the numbers change. And the first thing that kind of stood out to me was thinking about, what does it actually mean to be armed? So if we look at those fatal shootings by weapon types, we see some of the more expected and maybe violent things we would think at the top, like guns and knives. But as we go down the list, we start to find examples that sort of maybe raise some questions about what does it truly mean for someone to be sort of armed and threatening. Like toy weapons, for example, is one we hear about frequently when it happens, sort of this mistaken thing where someone with a toy is shot, and that accounts for 184 deaths in this data set. There's also like just things in this list that seem very non-threatening, like a screwdriver or a pen, which maybe would cause us to think more about, when is force really need to be used against someone. The second thing I looked at was just sort of examining the demographic differences between armed and unarmed shootings. So what we can do is break down these fatal shootings by was the person armed or unarmed. So I have no down here means they were armed, and yes means they were unarmed. And again, I use to calculate that, I just use this category of unarmed means you were unarmed, and everything else goes into the armed bucket. So we have to keep this in the back of our minds that, there's still an open idea here about, well, what does it really mean to be armed? So this analysis is really just based on this distinction. But what we've done is sort of a mix analysis to look at, okay, out of the percentage of people that were armed and killed versus the percentage of people that were unarmed and killed, how does the race of those people sort of break out? Is it the same? You'd imagine in a all things being equal situation that the breakdown wouldn't shift based on just armed or unarmed, or is it different? And we can actually see some significant variations in the data here. In this chart, you can see this blue block here corresponding to Black people growing significantly in size when we look at the unarmed category. So the people that were unarmed have a higher mix of, and the people that are unarmed and were killed have a higher mix of Black people than in the armed situation. And we can see the details of that in this table, where it's jumping by, 12% of the mix, 12 basis points essentially. Where in the normal breakdown of just armed people that were killed by police, Black people account for 23%. But when you look at the unarmed situation, that number jumps up to 35%. So that raises some more questions about, well, why is it different there? Like, what would be causing that? And further exploration of this data could be done to sort of try to determine that. I'll just show you a couple other things, data points in the data set that weren't included here that you might be interested in looking at yourself. I'm going to flip over into Knarr. If you look through the list of data columns that they provided in the database, flee is an interesting one, showing you sort of was the person fleeing or not. So you can maybe pull that out here, and we can start to get a picture of what that kind of breakdown looks like. There are other things here like threat level. Was a person attacking? Was it other or undetermined? Which it's hard to understand what those might mean. But we could maybe add that here as well. And so we could start to explore some of the dynamics of these events, understanding, what exactly was happening in these situations, and what was the response, what weapons were involved, and things like that. So I hope this gives you some ideas on what could be done with this data set to maybe inform yourself, inform policy, etc. And again, this is available at the Washington Post website, and they have a GitHub repository where they keep updating this data that they're collecting about these police shootings.